Afternoon. It's lovely to see you all here on a rather sunny afternoon. Are you all happy where you're sitting? Because there's a little bit of room so you can move down forwards if you're in the back row and you can't be at the front. Can you all hear me all right? I'll introduce you to Lesley. There's two Leslies, it's very confusing. I'm Lesley Dolphin from BBC Radio Suffolk. And I have to say, absolutely delighted to be here to talk to Lesley Glaister this afternoon. Before we actually talk about the book, let me just say very quickly that I think the festival has been absolutely fantastic. Meg Reed and all her volunteers have done a wonderful job. I don't know if you've been to any of the other talks, but it's been brilliant so far, and of course another day to go tomorrow. And we should say a big thank you as well to the sponsors, Seaport Freight Services, because without them this may not be happening, so a big thank you to them. So Lesley, welcome back to Suffolk.
Thank you.
And I say welcome back because I think several of you here know this anyway. Lesley grew up in the county. I think the county does feature in some of your books as well.
It does, yes.
Your earlier books. She's written loads, short stories, plays. Is it 13 novels, including this one? Including Little Egypt, which is the one we're talking about today. It won the Jerwood Fiction and Cover Prize last year, so I think we should start with some congratulations and applause.
Thank you.
So talking about the book, obviously as we go along, has everyone read the book? Or hopefully if you haven't, we're going to whet your appetites. Because one or two haven't, so we won't give away too many surprises. But I gather that this took you a while to write.
It did. I started this book in 1991. Wow. And it was published in 2014. So you can tell how long that was. What happened, my first book was published in 1990. And I was really lucky because it won a prize called the Somerset Maugham Award. And that is for a first novelist under 35 was at the time. And the prize is some travel money. And the idea is that you take your travel money and you go travelling and then you come back and write something. I had 3 children at home and there was no way I could just set off with a rucksack into the wild blue yonder, as I imagine Somerset Maugham would have imagined. So I actually ended up spending money on several different things that I needed more than to travel. But I did go on a holiday to Egypt, and part of that holiday was a trip down the Nile, and finishing in Luxor, and part of it was a visit to the Valley of the Kings, or a visit to the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. Which was, the whole holiday was just amazing. It's something I'd always wanted to do, somewhere I'd always wanted to see, and I wasn't disappointed. There was a wonderful, erudite guide on the trip who really talked us through things, took us to temples, explained, told us stories. So it was absolutely fascinating. But one day we went down into a tomb, and I think I'd eaten something, and I was feeling a bit dodgy, doing very well. And I don't know if anyone, I imagine some people here have done this, have been down into some of those tombs. I think I was in a slightly sort of hallucinogenic state from not feeling well. But I went down into this tomb, and the inside is so brightly and vividly painted. It almost feels as if it's just been finished and the paint isn't even dry yet. I remember being down in this tomb, and it's almost like you're in the desert and you go down these little throats, which is the entrance to the tomb, and then you're in these chambers, some of them quite big and some of them leading to other chambers, but all vividly painted with all those beautiful, intricate Egyptian hieroglyphs and pictograms and illustrations. And in this particular tomb, I just had a very, really peculiar sensation of, I don't know what it was, a shiver, like a shiver in my soul somehow, and it almost felt as if the paintings on the walls were wiggling. I think it was probably because I was not well, but it felt more metaphysical than that. And And that night I was quite feverish and I had a nightmare. And in the nightmare, I was in the tomb again, and I rose up and turned into pigment on the roof of the tomb and became the goddess Nut. And in the tomb there had been this painting of the goddess sort of spread out over the ceiling. So it was just a dream. It was a dream. It was an amazing dream, and it felt linked with that sort of shivery feeling that I'd had down there. So it was probably simply that I wasn't well, but it felt more important than that. And I thought, okay, I've come to Egypt on this travel money. Now I have the heart of my story. I felt pleased with that because I'd been looking around for something to write. It was fantastically interesting, but nothing was inspiring me. So I went home and I started to write this. But really it was an anecdote. It wasn't a story. I didn't know who it was who'd had a funny experience in the tomb. I didn't know why. I didn't know what happened next. It was a little isolated incident. And it sat in my mind for a long time, for years and years and years. Just not connecting to something. I think one of the mysterious things about writing, or any creativity, is not so much having an idea as having more than one idea, or feeling the connection between ideas. So there's an energy that flickers between, and it's very mysterious how things that are seemingly completely unconnected can actually almost germinate each other and then start to become fiction. And in this case, I was travelling along on a train, and I saw from a window a house that had obviously once been a grand, beautiful property, but had been hemmed in by roads, railways, can't remember. I mean, I saw it from a railway track. It was on a little island, really, an island of leftover land, very overgrown, roof all caved in. Just caught my eye. I just sort of thought, And as the train rushed on, I thought, that's something to do with my Egypt story. What if there was somebody in that house still? It looked like it was empty, but what if there was somebody still in there? Or what if they had been to Egypt? What if it was that person who had had a strange experience in a tomb? So it was, I don't know why those two ideas had anything to do with each other, but they did. And it was almost, once I'd thought that, it was almost as if, I mean, it had long gone past by the time I thought this, but it was almost as if I'd seen the face of an old lady looking out of the window. And I knew there was also somebody else in there. And then, almost as if behind the old lady there was the ghost of her child self who had lived there before, as if all the layers of herself were still there in that house. So now I had a structure for the book, because I had a present story with a derelict house, and I had a past story where we go back to the 20s in Egypt. And because this was a while ago, when I worked out the age of the old woman, who I called Isis, and how old I wanted her to be when she was in Egypt, I realised that this took me back to 1922. And 1922 happens to be the year that Tutankhamun was discovered by Howard Carter. So I thought, well, bingo, I mean, that's fantastic. And I did for a little while play with the idea of having Howard Carter in the novel, doing something with him, doing something sort of semi-historical in that way. But soon decided it was just too complicated. And he didn't really do what I wanted him to do anyway, so that didn't work. But I did a lot of reading of that time, and I realised that while there was a craze for Egyptology at that time. Everybody was mad for it, and people were dressing in Egyptian dresses and having Egyptian artifacts on their mantelpieces, and there were lots of lots of people, lots of archaeologists of different sorts, were going to Egypt searching for tombs. And there were people highly professional, knowledgeable, well-led, well-funded, people like Howard Carter. But there were also a lot of kind of amateur bunglers out there as well, who had ideas that they would find something and set off. And a lot of them were actually taken for a ride, because there were these rich Westerners out there with money to spend, and there were people out there thinking, oh, well, we could pretend there's a tomb over there, and so there's lots of jiggery pokery going on, as well as the genuine hunting, the genuine archaeological finds and so on. And the Egyptologists I'm writing about are of the amateur bungling end of the spectrum rather than the other. So shall I read a little bit?
Yeah.
I'll read a bit from the beginning.
Because that sort of sets it all, all up.
So this is the very opening of the book, and as such, I don't need to say much about it at all. I'll just begin reading it. Except I'll just say that this is in the present, outside, sort of frame of the story. A thin streak of a boy, American, with silver studs in his face and ears, pale, matted snakes of hair, and a distinct whiff of the vegetable about him. He hitchhikes when he needs to travel, or else he walks. He doesn't believe in money. Marvellous! We met when he sprang from a skip and landed right in front of me in a tumble of rolling oranges, frightening me half to death. He was all solicitation and apology. Charm, I'd go so far as to say. We were in the service area behind the supermarket, and I caught him dumpster diving. Usave throws out huge quantities of perfectly good foods just because it's out of date. A sinful waste and shame, I say, and have said, but do they take heed? Once I'd regained my composure, Spike showed me his haul and offered me a caramel donut. Delightful. And then he climbed back into the skip and called things out. Carrots, hummus, tiramisu. And if I said yes, he passed them to me, and I added them to my trolley. I've seen him regularly since then, and the same has happened, which does save money, but really the fun is in the sport of it, don't you know? If I could climb and spring about like Spike, I'd do it myself. The beauty of it is you never know what's coming next. I've been introduced to all sorts of new delights that way. Panna cotta, globe artichokes, sushi, chicken satay on most useful pointed skewers. Spike became a friend to me, like an angel, you might say, and it was Spike who set me free. We were sitting on a doorstep in the service area, sharing a tub of Kalamata olives. Not the most salubrious place. Here they keep the bins and skips and bales of flattened boxes. Here the dual carriageway roars above you, and occasionally a hubcap, or paper coffee cup, or strip of rubber tyre flies down. Here stray cats yowl and prowl. There's plenty of vermin to keep them fed. And here too, the smokers among the Usave staff emerge to puff on their cigarettes. I've spotted, I'm Doreen, how may I help you? The sourest faced person I've ever met, puffing away there. Seeing me with Spike caused her orange penciled eyebrows to shoot into her hairline, most gratifying. It was a late September day, still quite warm, and I'd rolled up my trouser legs to sun my shins, flaky and crinkled and mapped with veins. However did they get like that? Each time he finished an olive, Spike ejected the stone forcefully from between his lips, aiming for an empty beer can but overshooting. I told him he was blowing too hard. He demonstrated that if he blew more softly, the stone simply dropped onto his legs. Oh, move the tin further away then, dear, I suggested, but he merely frowned and desisted from his game. We turned to the subject of dreams in the sense of ambition. His I found grand but disappointingly vague. Peace, love, equality, and so on. visions of the world as it could be. As he waxed lyrical, I watched the nervous fidget of his hands, fingers young and straight but stained from smoking, painfully bitter nails. When the olives were gone, he rolled himself a cigarette. What's your dream then, Sissy? You see how I reverse my name? How much more comfortable it's made by such a simple flip. To leave, I said, nodding towards my home. Go where? Sunset Lodge, once I've sold up. He snorted his derision, but I indulged myself once more in describing the luxury I'd seen in the brochures. Reclining armchairs, vast televisions, tempting menus, alternative therapists, parties, seasonal entertainment, and a dedicated friend. Spike ground out his cigarette and filled with a packet of tobacco. Don't give in to that, he said. You asked my dream, I pointed out. We sat in a silence that almost approached the prickly for a while until he broke it. They still hassling you? I shook my head, which was a lie. Stephen, the latest of the developer's representatives, waits for me twice a week in the U-Safe cafe where I go each morning for my coffee. I conduct all my business in the cafe rather than let anyone into the house. Ozzy would go berserk at such an invasion. The U-Safe consortium proposed to buy Little Egypt, the last remnant of the family property, to raze to the ground and erect what they call a mega home store to win me, and Stephen's task to win me over. From the scattered litter, Spike picked up a glossy leaflet advertising this week's special offers and skimmed it, scoffing. 36 fishy nuggets. Buy 2, get 1 free. That's 108 fishy nuggets. The oceans will be fished out before they're finished. And think of all those fish without them nuggets, I jested. He didn't laugh. What if, I said, now, don't go getting on your high horse, dear, but what if a person did want to sell a property to someone like, say, U-Safe? Then they'd want their heads examined. He moved to a crouch, as if about to spring away, but I caught his arm. But what if, for instance, there was something there, something hidden that got uncovered, dug up, say, during the building work? He cocked his head at me and squinted. Like Roman ruins and stuff? I said, or a corpse, something in that line. There was a chink of silver against tooth as he puffed out his lip. Huh, they'd cover it up and you'd never know. Think they'd let anything get in the way of their profit. Though he was not to know it, these were the magic words that freed me. It was a thought quite new, a revelation. Ever since, well, for all these years, I've supposed that we could never leave, that once it was discovered, we'd go to prison. Ozzy certainly, and perhaps me too. That's what Victor believed, and left me believing. I needed to be back home to test the thought, to be alone. If Spike was right, then we could sell and go. Could it really be true? But what of Ozzy? I flailed about until Spike hauled me to my feet. My knees are really dreadful, the left in particular. You can get new ones, I hear. They're not so far at U-Safe. You really think so? I asked him. No, sir, said he.
It's so clever how that sets it all up, and you just have to keep on reading to find out what it is that's happened, and it swings from the present back to the 1920s, including the Egypt side of things. But
yes.
I mean, there's quite a lot more to the story in a way, isn't there? Do you need all that in place before you start writing? Does some of it happen as you're writing?
You mean the
The story of the twins, the story of the
yeah.
parents.
Well, I find it's interesting. I was in listening to Sophie Hannah and Adele Giras earlier, and Sophie Hannah was explaining how she intricately plots her story, and so she knows exactly what she's going to write, and that allows her the freedom to move around within the story and write the bits that she fancies writing at certain times. And I really envy someone that can do that can be organised enough to have the story plotted out in that way. For me, I never really know what's going to happen. obviously I had some idea, and then in this case I knew there had to be, I wanted there to be an episode in the tomb. It's funny because some of the people here I did English A-level with, and you'll probably remember that we did a passage to India, and in the Malabar Caves there's a passage there, and that always haunted me because it's a kind of mysterious, something happened in that cave, and you never really know what happened. You never really get to the truth of it. And I suppose that there's an echo of that. So thank you, Ian Forster. There's a little echo of that in my cave incident. So I knew that had to happen. And I also knew that at the end of the outside, the frame of the story, which is set in more or less the present, or the present as it was when I started, there's got to be a change. Otherwise it's rather... if nothing happens, so there's just this old lady in the present looking back to the past, and then you keep coming back. Possibly that would work, but I actually wanted there to be a story going on in that frame as well. So I knew that she's got to meet someone, and that the person that she meets has got to act as a catalyst for change, so that actually she's able to leave the end of the book. She's able to leave the house, which is what she wants to do. And that was another big hold-up for me in writing this book, because the first person that I was writing about is called Marta, and she's a Romanian young woman who was people trafficked and actually really had a horrible life, but managed to escape, and during her escape went to the supermarket, was dropped off hitchhiking at the supermarket, and met ISIS and went into the house, and that was going to be the outside story. She was pregnant, she was going to have a baby, there was all sorts of, there's a lot of it, there's a lot of story there. But I got very interested in Marta and found myself writing from her point of view about ISIS, which was fun because it allowed me to see ISIS from the outside. But I also found myself wanting to know about her past back in Romania. So I was writing memory pieces about Marta, and I was finding that myself getting almost as if all this business with Little Egypt and ISIS and Osiris were getting sidelined, and I was getting much too interested in the other story. And so I decided that I had to sack Marta, because she was sort of elbowing her way into the centre. So I put her aside and put the book aside for a long time. And then went back to it again and wrote some of the past, but I needed that frame, and I needed the security of knowing that I knew where I was going with that outside, the outside frame. And so I invented Polly. And Polly was a teenager, also pregnant, also on the run, also dropped off at USAVE, also met ISIS in the cafe, also went back to the house and initiated this move. But then I got too interested in Polly, and I started writing Polly's backstory. What on earth had caused Polly to run off? And so she had to go the same way as Marta. And then I had another long gap. And then I was sitting on a bus one day, and I was listening to some people who had just been, as they call it in America, dumpster diving, just licking things out of skips, and behind a supermarket. And I don't know, there was something about one of the guys, and I thought, maybe it's him. And I decided this time not to go inside his head at all. So we only ever see him, Spike, who just met, from the outside. So we don't know too much about him. He's interesting enough, but not so interesting he's going to take the story over. So he was actually quite a well-behaved character. And once I got Spike in place, the outside bit of the book I wrote fairly quickly. And then I felt I had a framework, and I was able to start structurally.
And the horrible bits.
The horrible bits.
With Osiris, because there's Isis and Osiris,
yes.
They're twins, aren't they?
That's right. As the twins, Isis and Osiris from the Egyptian myths, or the founders almost.
I had to look
the
that
dynasty,
up,
yeah. And probably won't say what that bit is in case it wasn't.
Spoiler.
Yeah. But So there is a little bit of a slightly gruesome bit.
Slightly more, quite a lot, because the story slowly gets more macabre, doesn't it? Would I be better? Or is it, I think Gothic is what people like to describe it as, and you just have to keep reading and keep reading, and isn't that a symbol? That's something you've always done in your writing, isn't it? You don't write happy jolly books. Am I insulting you?
No, you're not. No, you're not. So they're not happy jolly books, but I like to think there's a kind of, well, maybe I've got a peculiar sense of humour, but for me, there's a sort of thread of humour going on in there as well, or at least a sense of the absurd, which is, I don't know. I think having a sense of the absurd in life is the only way to stay sane, really, in the crazy world that we live in.
And Isis, because it's Isis that holds it all together, isn't it?
Yes. Oh yes, it's her story really, and that's why I had to be very careful not to let another character come in. So she's a layered character because she's an old lady and because she's and then in the other story she goes from being about 13 up to being a young woman really, except that it becomes, I mean most of it's when she's 13. This whole central section of the book set in Egypt is when she is 13. She's just at that point, she's just about to become a woman, and her, I suppose, although she would not have thought of it in those terms herself, nor would anybody really around her, but she's very hormonal and sort of changing in a very hot country, feeling displaced and feeling strange, in a strange environment, in Egypt, which she absolutely loathes. Both her parents were very madly keen Egyptologists, obsessive, and were gradually frittering away all the family fortune in a search for somebody called Herihor, who was not actually a king but a general, and finding guides who swore that they knew where he was, finding maps for them that they would go off with, hire a team of people and go off into the desert, and it was all smoke and mirrors. And Isis sort of gradually begins to realise, and that horrible feeling of seeing that her parents might be being hoodwinked, and the rest of the family are all Uncle Victor, well not Uncle Victor actually, but the parents and her brother are just completely obsessed. And she hates it, she resents Egypt because it's kind of taken the rest of life away from her really. So she's very unhappy in those parts. But going back to the gruesome bit, I felt it was a kind of, and when I first wrote it, and this was another problem I had, it came quite near the beginning. And then I was stuck. And I think it wasn't until later on in the process that I realised that I can't get any more gruesome than that, really. Or I'm not going to, anyway. So that in a way, we have to work up to that. I think it's horrible when you're reading a novel and there's something gratuitous, nasty violence or sex or anything grotesque and that feels gratuitous. I think it's got to be earned. In a sense, there's got to be enough build-up, and there's got to be a story logic to it. And to me, with the whole obsession with Egypt, that seemed to be a logical conclusion. So, but it's when I moved it to I don't know, 3/4 of the way through, that also helped the structure and the pace. Honestly, when you're writing a novel, I think the structure is the hardest thing. You can be a great writer. You can have wonderful scenes, fantastic characters, wonderful places and landscapes, a sense of place, fantastic dialogue. You can have all those things, but if you don't put them in the right order, the whole thing you can squander your effects. So, and I always struggle with that, with finding a way to tell a story that has a logic, and it might be quite complex to do, but it won't feel complex to read.
And do you know you've got it?
Yes.
You've got that eureka moment.
I know, it's funny, again, it's mysterious, because it's almost like you're trying to balance things, and you can balance something so it looks like it's balanced, but you kind of know it's not really balanced. and then, but when it really is balanced, you know, and it's a sort of, it's an abstract feeling, but it feels very physical when it's right.
Esther Freud this morning was saying pretty much the same. The books very rarely start and do themselves.
No.
But when she goes back and reads it, she can't. When she looks at the page that's spent ages and ages working on, and a page that she did in the morning, she actually can't tell the difference in the writing herself.
Yeah.
Can you, when you look back, could you tell?
No, I think that it's interesting. I've had the same thing. I can struggle and struggle and struggle with a piece, and then another piece can just go like that, and there isn't. I mean, sometimes I know because I remember struggling over it, but the quality of the writing isn't necessarily any different. That was one of the other things with this book. Actually, I felt like one of the images I sometimes get when I'm writing fiction is it's like pushing a wheelbarrow full of stones uphill. But every now and again you get to an easy bit, a bit where you go on flat, or even you go downhill, and it just whizzes along and the words just come flowing easily. But with this one, I just felt it took me ages and ages, it took me literally years, probably, I don't know, 20 years nearly, to get to a point where, and it was when I got the structure, it was when I'd made those decisions and got the structure that it just flowed, and I finished it off very quickly. It only took me, a few weeks once I got it all in place. And I suppose that's partly because it had been brewing and I had episodes written. But I must have written, I've thrown away about, nearly as much as is here, I think. Which is heartbreaking. But it has to be done.
You can read another piece?
Yes, I can read another piece. I'm going to read a little bit from when they're actually in Egypt. So this is... this is another character in this book is Uncle Victor, and Uncle Victor is charged at some point. The twins are waiting for their parents to come back, and their parents don't come back and don't come back and don't come back, and it's because they think they're on the brink of finding the tomb, so they can't bear to break off. And actually there are financial problems as well, although the children don't know that at this point. And so the parents send for Uncle Victor, who is actually Evelyn, who is Isis and Osiris's mother, his twin brother, to bring them over to Egypt instead, to bring them over. He was in the First World War and is still suffering from shell shock or a neurological kind of condition, as well as having physical injuries still. He's all right, but he's not really the person to take adolescent twins out into the desert in search of some very difficult to find parents. The parents, they're meant to meet in Cairo. They don't manage to meet them in Cairo. And Haru and Akhil are the guides who are looking after them, who are getting quite angry. Things are getting quite dodgy because they've been basically left with this hopeless Western man and these twins to find in Egypt to find their parents. So they're kind of they set off into the desert in search of them, with some idea where they might be. But then they have all sorts of problems, breakdowns, and they haven't been paid. So the situation is quite tense. And I'm just going to read a little bit here from the actual journal. Okay. They drove and drove on dry brown roads through dry brown land. What would they do when night fell? Where would they sleep? And the night did fall. One moment there was a fiery balloon low in the saffron sky, and the next it had burst into scarlet shreds. And swiftly the sky went dark. Victor woke up and smoked at some point, and then the lorry began making stuttering sounds and ground to a halt. Haru swore and jumped out, shouting something to Akhil in the back. Isis allowed herself a small sip of water and climbed stiffly out to check that Ozzy was all right. Ozzy was in the back of the truck, so exposed to the elements. It was cold and the sky was crammed with stars, crushed together far too tightly so it looked like a scrumple of silver foil. "Ozzy," she called, but he didn't answer, and she couldn't see him. Akil was standing a little way away with Haru, who was talking in fast, terse undertones. She clambered up, barking her shin on the rusty metal. "Ozzy?" She made out a small hump that was he. Put her hand out to reach him and caught hold of his shin, ice cold and stiff and prickled with hairs. She let out a cry. "What is it I see?" called Victor. Her breath was caught like something thick, like wooding in her throat. He was stone cold dead, and she opened her mouth to scream, but no scream came, and then she felt him move. "What is it?" Ozzy said, and she sat down with a thump beside him. "I was asleep," he said crossly. But she didn't care how cross he was, she hugged him. So cold, he was like the statue of a boy. He needed more clothes if he was to continue in the back of the lorry. He would freeze to death. And if Victor wasn't going to look after him, then she ballywell would. "We need to open the trunk and get some clothes out," she called. "We're perishing." "I'm all right," Ozzy said. He never felt the cold, but Isis was shivering now. Why did all that heat go? In summer at home it never got so hot, but on scorching days it stayed warm in the evening. This heat was like bathwater, all run away in the dark, as if down a plug hole. "Why have we stopped?" Ozzy's voice was cross and scratchy with sleep. "I've broken down," Victor said. "Here, Icy, you open up the trunk. I could do with a pullover myself." Isis reached over and took the key. The trunk that contained clothes for all three of them was behind a partition. She'd seen Akil and Haru load it. "Help me," she said to Ozzy. She was thinking of putting on a cleaner dress, stockings and a cardigan. There were cakes of soap in there, the ivory sort that Evelyn liked best. They could pour water from the bottles over their hands and wash them properly at least. But behind the partition there was nothing. It was too dark to know for sure at first, and horrible to put your hands into a space you could not see. But she had to make herself feel, and she felt, and came across nameless bits and pieces, but nothing the size or shape of a trunk. She would not believe it, but kept feeling about, measuring the space with her hands until she was certain she'd covered every nook and cranny. "It's gone!" she wailed at last. "Don't be such a clot," Victor said. "You find it then." Ozzy was on his knees now, feeling about. "It's not here," he confirmed. Victor got up onto the back of the lorry and stumbled towards them. Isis's eyes were growing used to the dark now, and she could see the absence of the trunk. She could see how Victor was holding out his hands like a sleepwalker. "Here," she said, guiding him. "It was just here. I saw them put it in." She caught Victor's hand to put it into the absence and felt that it was trembling. "Must be here," he said. "Perhaps they moved it." "Haru!" Isis called, and her voice came out querulous and panicky, and when he came to see what she wanted, she smoothed down. "We can't seem to locate the trunk. We need some warmer clothes." "It's there," he said. "Pull away there." And he clucked his tongue and jumped up to show them. And he did seem surprised that it wasn't there. As far as Isis could tell in the darkness, he really didn't seem to know. "It's all our things." Her teeth were chattering now and her voice wobbled. Mary had spent ages washing and ironing and folding, and Isis happened to know that there were some treats hidden among the clothes. She had seen the humbugs and aniseed balls. Uncle Victor's things were in there too, though they had made a fearful squash, as it had been decided at the last minute that travelling with one trunk would be cheaper and easier. There was silence in the back of the lorry, and for the first time it struck Isis how very, very quiet it was out here. A different kind of quiet from that at home. All you could hear was the hissing of the stars, as if the sky had a million punctures. "Akil!" Haru left off the back of the lorry into the darkness, and they heard shouting. "What should we do?" Isis asked Victor. "Want my cardigan?" Her voice wobbled on this last homesick kind of word. "Buggered if I know." Victor slumped down and put one arm round Isis and one round Ozzy. At least there was some warmth that way. They sat, stunned, for a long time, listening to the silence of the desert, punctuated at first by quarrelling and the thwack of someone being hit, and later sounds of the engine being tinkered with, and at last a stuttering roar of success. Harry shouted over the back, "We'll stay here till dawn." "Can you offer an explanation for the trunk?" Victor called, but there was no answer. Only the slam of one cab door and then the other. Isis gave him the key back, though there was no point in it now. Through the removed partition, they could hear the rumble of Haru and Akil's voices. They all listened, but could make out nothing, of course, but their tempers. "It'll all come out right in the morning, you'll see," Isis said. "We can all keep warm together." "That's the spirit," Victor gloomed.
I'll get you to ask questions in just a minute or two, but I did read somewhere that you quite like to write in bed.
Yes, I do. Yes, I find it kind of depends for me what part of the book I'm on and how I'm feeling. But it's very comfortable sitting propped up, and you can kind of trick yourself into working because your body feels like you're not. So you can get a cup of tea, and if it's cold, a hot water bottle, and just get comfy. And it's also where you dream then. So it feels like a nice place to write. And often first draft bits I write by hand in bed, because sitting up with a keyboard seems much more formal somehow. And I feel as if the quality of writing is a little bit different somehow. It's much more almost secret and private, and I don't know. Once it's on the computer, I almost feel as if the computer's got a personality of some sort and it's judging it. But no, the pen and the paper, there's no judge.
It's still yours while it's written down.
Yeah, yes.
So, and who do you show it to first?
I don't usually show anyone any of it, of anything, until I've finished not only a first draft, but probably a second or third draft. So I've kind of got it all there. And at that point, I feel I can take criticism. I feel as if it's a bit fragile earlier than that, and if somebody is reading it and pulling it apart before I've kind of got it, then it might just all disappear, or might fall apart. So my husband, who's a writer, always reads it first, and then I've got various other friends, writer friends, who give me an opinion. So, and they have to be somebody who I know will be honest and will not, because it's very difficult. I mean, I'm often in that situation. I'm reading work for somebody else, and if it's a friend or someone that you have another agenda with, apart from just reading their work, it's actually quite hard just to be completely straight and honest. And how can you say to somebody that you really love, "This is rubbish"? I mean, it's very difficult. But anyway, my husband will say that if he would. And I was yes, he wouldn't. I would say it to him. Not quite as a couch at a little ball, carefully.
I imagine it's a bit like having a baby that you're almost handing out into the world, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's a change even when one other set of eyes have been over it, it feels very different. So if I give somebody something to read and then I read it again, I see it differently. Pretty funny. I don't know what it is then. It's seeing it through someone else's eyes. It's like with your house, that you don't really think about it until you know someone else is coming around, and then you start seeing all the cobwebs and
You've been around my house, obviously. And looking back, because this is the 13th novel, as we said, has your style changed over that time, do you think?
It must have done. It must have done, wasn't it? But yes, I mean, when I look back at Honour Thy Father, which is my first published book, it's written in I can't identify it. It's just a slightly different take. It's funny because I've been seeing old school friends just over the last days, and it's just like the same people, but there's a slightly different take because I'm older and they're older, and we've got so much more life. And I suppose it's the same with the writing voice, that it will change so it's just everything changes. But there's something essential stays the same.
You have a voice in your head that you're writing with, because when you read it, I guess you're reading in that writing voice.
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. Yes.
So, has anyone got some questions? Oh, start at the end.
have a few interrelated ones, very simple answers. You seem to be an earthy person, and you're not using a computer. But you gave me the impression you very mystic experiences inspire you to write. You know, Egypt, last month you didn't mention not last month.
No.
But you lived in Scotland and drama there, haven't you? You teach in St Andrews.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
So you have that related. But it seems that you like mystic to inspire you to write. I'll ask you a question.
Oh, ask me the question.
Yes.
Can I just check? Can you all hear the questions? So I don't know. First question, because I'll just repeat them.
They're interrelated. They're simple and easy to answer.
Okay, so first question was, does she need a mystic experience to write?
Is that actually a question, or are you just saying that?
I'm finished now.
Okay.
You talked about shivering feelings. That's why I asked the
Yeah.
question. And did you study Egyptian culture to relate this story to us? So you can answer all you want to. And have you done drama production recently, St Andrews? Recently, not the past.
A drama production?
Yeah. But you've done some on radio.
Yes, I've done some radio, yeah. No, well,
recently you did.
No, recently I haven't, no.
So do you need a mystic experience? Have you studied Egyptology, and was there a drama production recently?
Yes. Well, they're not, the last one I'll just say no, because there wasn't. Not necessarily a mystical experience, but there is something, there is a sense that some ideas have a life to them. And for me, it's quite a physical feeling. It's a physical, and then the novel is a physical manifestation of an idea, a bristle and a ripple. So I don't think you call that mystical. I don't know really. But about the other one?
Thank you.
Oh, Egyptology. Yes, I did. I had that initial trip, and I was very interested and read some more after that. And since then, there's always documentaries on television like ancient Egypt, and I usually watch them. And I did quite a lot of research. There's a particular village that's the village of the tomb builders, they have their own tombs and their own tools, and it's very, very well preserved. Very interesting. I can't remember what it's called. And I read a book about that, and I don't know, just did various bits. I did research it, yes, but not in any detail. There's such a huge, huge amount of stuff about ancient Egypt. It would have taken the rest of my life, actually, to read it all. So I just did enough. I hope.
Who else?
Lesley, when you have those quick experiences and bits of inspiration, and you saw the house from the train, and how do you compartmentalize all those things? Do you write them all down and have a system of keeping all these ideas, or do you compartmentalize them somewhere in your...
I tend to, if I have a feeling, like in that case with the house, it was almost like a photograph in my brain, so I almost didn't need to write it down, but I did. And so I do carry a notebook around with me, and I do try to write ideas down. I don't think compartmentalize is a bit more organised than I actually am, I think. I don't have compartments, really. But actually having a computer does allow me to be a little bit more organised, because I'll open files for ideas, and every now and again I might just write something, an idea down. A lot of it is just held in a sort of suspension somewhere. But as I say, it's all about an idea becoming something physical, feeling like something physical, and then making it into something physical. The whole process is so odd, really, isn't it? Of one person imagining something, making black squiggles on a page, and other people at the other side of those black squiggles, having not the same experience, but a similar experience, or possibly, I don't know how near to what I'm seeing and feeling and thinking and meaning anybody else gets. Everybody who reads it will have a different experience.
Yeah, and when they hear your voice in the same way, that's right, intriguing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Lesley, I always think that these things do help a lot in getting people to understand your thought patterns. My interest always is, how do you get that first word, that first sentence down. You've got a blank bit of paper sitting in your bed with a cup of tea. Where do you start from that first little bit? Or do you sort of do somewhere in the middle of the book effectively, and you're writing something down that the beginning will come later?
Very good question, because that is really, often I'll have an idea in my head for a long time, and I think possibly one of the reasons it took me so long to get this, because I couldn't get the voice for the book. And a writer has their own voice, but then I think within that, it's a slightly different version of that voice for the book. For me, it's when a sentence or a phrase comes in the right form. And it usually happens for me when I'm walking. I've got a dog that I take for a walk every morning, and those dog walks are obviously very good, good for you physically to go for a dog walk, but there's something about the rhythm of walking along, and it seems to jog, thoughts turn over, I seem to go into a slightly different state of mind if we walk long enough. And very often that's and it's when you're not trying. I think if I go out for a walk and I think, right, this morning I'm going to find out what happens at the end of that chapter, or I'm going to find out, what happens at the end of this book. That just doesn't work. But just walking and not thinking about the book at all, usually I'll find myself thinking about it, and I'll find a solution or the tone of voice. And it's and again, it's like I was saying before about about the structure, when you know it's right. With the voice, you just know when the right tone is there. So it's difficult.
Do you sometimes go back? You've written something, it's the opening paragraph.
Yeah.
And you go back because you just haven't got the impact you want to draw people in.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I'm just glad when I say the beginning of something, I don't necessarily mean the beginning that you get when you read the book, but the beginning for me of what is the beginning of the process of it becoming manifest as a book rather than just an idea. But yes, I mean, I do many drafts always, and rarely is the first page the first thing that I've written.
So if you've had the idea when you're walking the dog, do you then turn around and go back home to the dismay of the dog probably, so you can write
No,
it
but I do quite often stop and to the dismay of the dog and jot things down. Yes. Yeah. And it's frustrating when that happens when I haven't got anything to write on.
Phones are good these days.
And it's funny because then I can repeat, I can sort of repeat it over and over. It's something that when I write poetry as well, and if a poem comes in my mouth, I'm really stuck if I haven't got anything to write on. Because even though I know, that was a poem about that, I don't know, dew dripping off that author berry or whatever it is. When I get home, I know, there's a poem about the dew dripping off the author berry, but it's not the poem. It's not the poem. It's the idea for the poem. Yes, and it has to be got there. You have to catch it when it's there. Yeah. So I do try and always have a notebook, but it doesn't always work.
Have you found, obviously you're a teacher of creative writing, have you found that the style of writing has changed over a period of which you've been writing? What age did you start writing?
So is this
style
of writing?
Yeah, the style of writing.
Your style or
My
what
style.
else?
Just generally because you're teaching, and now books can skip and go back and change in time, can't they? And you just feel like, well, as a painter, there's a zeitgeist, isn't there? And does that happen with writing?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And there's very much a sort of orthodoxy about teaching creative writing, about not overly using adjectives, and about staying faithful to a point of view and not roaming about all over the place.
Because you're very typewriter, aren't you? Very descriptive.
Yes.
Very clear and precise, fewer words.
Yes. But then,
and it says a lot.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that is a way that people tend to write now.
Yes.
It's a much more psychological way of writing, in a sense that I think fiction used to be. Yes, there's not an author who is all-knowing, who kind of and makes judgments about the world, sort of classic omniscient narrator. It's very old-fashioned now.
Yes.
So you can go back and read books, and one of my favourite writers is Elizabeth Taylor, and I've just been reading a book of hers recently called Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont, which is a lovely, lovely novel. But when I was reading it, I was quite surprised about a lot of it is now if Elizabeth Taylor came to was doing an MLit in creative writing with me, I would be looking at that manuscript and saying, ooh, no, you can't do that. So that's seems to be fashion, really.
Yes,
And probably one day someone will be reading this. Well, it'd be lovely to think that, wouldn't it? In 50 years or something, and thinking, oh no, we wouldn't write like that now. You know,
There's
so
evolution.
definitely there is, yes. And there's very much, I think, and I really try to not to fall into this trap of having a real orthodoxy of writing and being blinkered against someone who is writing outside it, but writing really well, because one day it'll change, you know, and one day somebody's going to come along and do something, a brilliant, different kind of writing. And it's a shame always to be chopping everybody back and trying to make everybody like sausages, really, or writing the same. So, but it's true, yeah. It's a good question.
Can you learn to write? Can you be taught?
That's a question that is yes and no, I would say. Yes, you can be taught to focus. You can be taught what's a bad writing style. You can be taught common mistakes. You can be taught how to focus properly. You can be taught how to pace, how to move from chapter to chapter. Even perhaps how to structure, even perhaps how to plot, even perhaps how to create a character, even perhaps how to create atmosphere and landscape. But you can't teach someone to have the kind of quality of observation and concentration and selection of detail. So the same, 100 people could walk through the same field, and maybe one of those people might be able to write a brilliant poem about that experience. Everyone's seeing the same things. Lots of them could describe them. You can't teach that thing, that je ne sais quoi, that makes somebody make something into what I would grandly call art. It's not always art, but you know what I mean. That transfer something physical into something else. So you can't teach that, and that's just the mysterious thing that some people have. It's like you could teach 100 people to play a violin, and lots of them would be able to play it well, but there wouldn't be many. Some of them, one or two of them, might be a genius. You know? But you can't teach that. That thing you can't teach. Yeah.
I think we're rapidly running out of time. I think your mum wants to ask you a question.
I just wanted to say that as soon as Lesley could read and write, she was writing stories. It was really born in her.
Were they always a little...
Yes, they
Because I think I asked this a while ago.
There was that little macabre touch. That's all.
But I can't answer that.
Did you want to finish with a little read?
Oh, I could do. Is it? Have you got
I
time?
don't know. What's your watch? Mine says it's about 3 minutes to go. Or is that right?
I've got time. I'll just read a tiny little bit. I'll just sit here. This is just from the. This is Sissy and her supermarket. Since you say arrived, my life has been arranged like this. Each day I push my trolley across the bridge to lose myself in that sweet brightness, the million choices that there are. The store is open 24/7, as they term it. And in the middle of the night, if I can't sleep, I go across the bridge and wander in the aisles counting things. In home laundry, for instance, I have counted 54 ways you can wash your clothes. There's liquid and there's powder and there's capsules, there's bio and non-bio, special stuff for colours, whites and blacks, and that doesn't count conditioning or stain removal. How does a person make a decision like that? And that's just one decision out of perhaps hundreds. Or I ride the moving pathway that sweeps you up to clothing, household and electrical. They have a pharmacy, a post office counter, a bank machine, even a dentist who does a weekly clinic. I do my ablutions in the ladies, eat and conduct my business in the cafe with its panoramic view of Little Egypt. Buy my food and clothes there. I have training shoes with flashing lights, $6.99, meant for children, I know, but such a lark. How could one resist? I buy books and batteries for my radio. Even find my friends there. Take Spike, for instance.
Thank you very, very much for coming along and taking the time. I've been fascinated. I love the book as well. And I can't say anything about the ending, but read through because it's a good ending. Is that a fair way to approach it, one way or the other? I think you're going to go and sign copies of your book now, aren't you, as
Yes,
well?
if anyone
So
wants
if you want to buy a copy or get your copies signed, then we'll be, I think, it was originally in Harry's Mall, but I think most people are sitting and doing it where the books have been bought, so just round the corner. So once we've left, you can follow fast and buy copies. Thank you very much. Thank you.